Welcome back. You're with Paul LaFrancois again, your instructor for managerial economics. And in this second video, we're going to focus on the concept of marginal analysis. In our first video, we introduced the concept of opportunity cost. We said that's the fundamental way we measure costs in economics. And we defined it as the value of the best alternative foregone. So every time a decision gets made, we give up something. And the value of the best alternative we give up is defined as opportunity cost. So individuals have to make choices, organizations have to make choices, societies have to make choices. And for this course, we're paying particular attention to how organizations make choices, the challenges they face in achieving their goals and objectives. And in general, economic theory suggests that there are two concepts we should consider when making choices: the marginal benefit of the choice and the marginal cost of the choice. And in theory, that's pretty straightforward, but in reality, it's oftentimes more complicated. So just to think of an example, a firm is considering whether or not to hire a new employee. What goes into that consideration? So on the benefit side, we think about what is that employee going to contribute to the firm? How is that going to impact the firm's revenue stream? How is it going to impact the productivity of other workers? What are all the factors that go into consideration in hiring that person on the benefit side of the picture? On the cost side of the picture, the organization has to think about what's going to be the additional salary for that person, what's going to be the benefits package, what's going to be the training costs involved. And when you think about all of those items I've just mentioned, I would argue that they are all either marginal benefits or marginal costs. So one of the terms you'll hear over and over again, you'll read over and over again in your textbook, is this concept of marginal. So what do we mean by that term? If you had to think of a synonym, another word to substitute for marginal, what would it be? And some ones I could suggest would be additional, extra, or incremental. So all of economic theory is based around the idea of marginal analysis. And it's the idea that we can't go back and change what we did yesterday. We can't go back and change what we did last week. Can't go back and change what we did last year. So those factors should not be considered in the decision-making process. The decisions we make today can impact today, tomorrow, the next day, or the future. So marginal analysis is a future-oriented concept. And we think those are the concepts that are most critical to the organization, how it's going to impact its future. So I say in theory, it's relatively easy to talk about marginal benefits and marginal costs. In reality, it gets more complex because we live in a world of uncertainty. But the theory suggests what I'm going to call the equal marginal principle. That any time an organization makes a decision, it looks at or examines what's the additional gains from that decision. What are the benefits received to the organization? And we think that if the benefits exceed the additional costs, then the firm should go forward with that decision. If the additional costs exceed the additional benefits, the organization should not make that decision. Well, that gives rise to what we think of as the equimarginal principle or equal marginal principle. And it's the idea that you should keep engaging in an activity as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. So, easy to put on the board, easy to say in theory, not so easy to do in reality. But one of the key ideas in economics is that if this process is followed, then prices, which give us a lot of information, give a lot of information to an individual, to an organization, or to the economy, but that prices should reflect a fundamental idea that the benefits received from a decision are just offset by the costs. So when you think about the price of a product, what does that price represent? It represents the idea that the benefit being received from the person purchasing that product is equivalent to the cost incurred by the firm producing that product. So that's one of the fundamental ideas in economics, that the equitable or equal marginal principle leads to an efficient allocation of resources, and it guides firms' decision making in allocating those resources. So in thinking about that idea, I do want to leave you with what sometimes in economics is called a paradox, and sometimes it's referred to as the diamond's water paradox. And if you think about it, most of you probably use water on a regular basis. And if I ask you the question, what's the price of water? How much does that water cost you? What would most of you answer? And I would assume that most of you would think water is a relatively low-priced good. And I would probably agree with you. I think of water as something that you turn on the faucet, there it is. If you go into the grocery store to buy it, it's certainly not one of those high-ticket items. And then think about the idea of diamonds. What do you think about when you think about the price of a diamond? How many have a diamond? I don't. But some of you may, but most of us can probably get through life relatively easily without a diamond. Yet we think a diamond is a relatively high-priced item. It commands a relatively high price. So that seems to be a paradox, that water, something we all need and use on a regular basis, has a relatively low price associated with it. And diamonds, something we think we could live without, has a relatively high price associated with it. So how do we explain that in terms of economics? How do we use the idea of marginal analysis, looking at the benefits and costs involved in producing those products, consuming those products? That seems to be a paradox. That seems to not make sense to some people. We need and use water every day, yet it has a relatively low price. Many of us live throughout our lives never owning a diamond, yet it commands a relatively high price. So can marginal analysis help us explain why that is? What causes that difference? And what we're going to do in our next video is look at that question from the perspective of the fundamental model in economics. So I wonder if all of you can tell me what that fundamental model is. When all else fails and you get an economics question, what should your answer be? I don't know. What should it be? But when all else fails, when in doubt, the good old answer, supply and demand, is a good possible answer for an economics question. So one of the ideas that a lot of the managerial economics course is going to focus on pricing. Because we think ultimately in a market economy, prices reflect both the idea of the benefits of a decision being made and the cost of that decision being made. So in our next video, that's our challenge, is how can we use that supply and demand model to answer the question of our diamonds and water paradox, but maybe more importantly, how do we get an understanding that prices reflect the benefits and costs put on the production and or consumption of a product. All right, so think about the diamonds water paradox. When we come back in our next video, that's one of the questions that we are going to try to answer. Or maybe you can find the answer to it before that next video.